The carriage clock on the mantelpiece chimed 6, each delicate strike a golden hammer against the anvil of the evening's silence. Verity straightened the last fork at the head of the table, her fingers tracing the worn pattern of the family silver. It was her family, her silver, her table, and yet she felt as if she were a ghost, polishing the artifacts of a life she was permitted to service but never truly inhabit. Her own reflection looked back at her from the polished mahogany, a pale, serious face, with eyes that had learned to see too much, and a mouth that had learned to say too little. From the drawing room, the sound of her sister Clara's laughter, a high, brittle thing, loaded down the hall, followed by the deeper, more indulgent chuckle of their father. They were waiting for dinner, the dinner Verity had planned, whose ingredients she had haggled for in the village, whose menu she had debated with the cook, and whose table she had just finished setting. She was the unseen engine of the household, a complex machine of duties and lists that produced warmth, comfort, and order, and was rewarded with the quiet hum of being taken for granted. Her mother swept into the dining room a rustle of silk and a cloud of lily-of-the-valley perfume, a Verity. "Darling, must you hover? You look like the new parlor-maid, perpetually fussing," as she did not say it with malice, but with the breezy, unthinking cruelty of a woman who had never had to fuss over anything in her life. She adjusted a flower in the centerpiece, a minor correction that changed nothing, but asserted her own passive authority. A was just ensuring everything was in its place. "Mother," Verity said, her voice even. "Yes. Well, your place is in the drawing room with our guest." Serviceable gray poplin that had been her best 2 seasons ago. It was clean, it was mended, but it was not the pale silk of her sister's gown. You have a smudge on your chin." Verity's hand flew to her face. There was nothing there. It was a phantom smudge, a dismissal made manifest. Her mother had already turned away, drifting back toward the sounds of life in the other room, leaving Verity alone with the perfectly set table that was the sum of her afternoon's work, self-sufficient. The word for a horse that does not need to be fed. She took a deep, steadying breath, the scent of beeswax and lemon oil, a familiar comfort. She had been the unpaid housekeeper of her own family for 10 years, ever since it became clear that her quiet nature and lack of a dazzling dowry made her poor material for the marriage market. Clara was the beauty destined for a brilliant match. Verity was the useful one, the one who managed the books, placated the butcher, and remembered which linen was for company and which was for every day. She entered the drawing room just as her father was laughing at something their guest, Lord Ashworth, had said. Ashworth was a portly man of 50, with a damp-looking face and a reputation for appreciating young, impecunious wives. He was the reason for the good silver and the frenzied effort of the day. Her father saw him as the solution to Clara's future. Clara saw him as a bore. Verity saw him as the price of her family's precarious gentility. "Ah, Verity," her father boomed, noticing her at last. There you are. Come, sit. Lord Ashworth was just telling us about his new hunter." "Ah," Verity murmured a polite greeting and took the only empty seat, a small, hard-backed chair near the fire screen, slightly outside the main circle of conversation. From here, she had a perfect view of the room's minor imperfections. The slight fraying on the edge of the rug, the film of dust on the picture rail the maid had missed, the way Lord Ashworth's waistcoat strained at its buttons. She was not there long before a different carriage crunched on the gravel outside. A late arrival, her father frowned, not having expected anyone else. The butler, old Higgins, appeared at the door, his face a mixture of confusion and awe. "My lord," he announced, his voice trembling slightly. The Marquis of Wickliffe. A profound silence fell over the little drawing room. The Marquess of Wickliffe, Everett Carrington. He was not a neighbor, he was a magnate, a power in the county, a name spoken with the sort of reverence usually reserved for royalty or weather. His estate, Harrowmere, was a legend, A vast sprawl of ancient stone and endless acres some 20 miles distant. For him to be here, unannounced, was like a king wandering into a provincial tavern. Her father scrambled to his feet, his face flushed. "Ah, the Marquis here. Show him in, man, show him in." Everett Carrington, the Marquis of Wycliffe, did not so much enter the room as possess it. He was tall, with an unnerving stillness about him, dressed in dark, perfectly tailored riding clothes that spoke of function, not fashion. His face was all sharp angles and quiet control, his eyes a cool, assessing gray. He looked like a man who had been burdened with a title so young that all warmth had been crowded out by the sheer weight of duty. He noticed everything. He noticed the dust on the picture rail. He noticed the strained waistcoat on Lord Ashworth. He noticed her. His gaze passed over her father as fawning, her mother as flustered curtsy, Clara's wide-eyed stare, and rested for a fraction of a second on Verity in her corner chair. It was not a look of interest, but of cataloguing. As if he were taking inventory of the room, and she was simply another piece of furniture. My apologies for the intrusion," he said, his voice low and devoid of inflection. My business is with Mr. Atherton." I was given to understand he was a man of some legal expertise. Her father, a country solicitor whose business was mostly wills and land disputes, swelled with pride. "Indeed, my lord, indeed. An honor to be of service. Whatever you require." Just then, a small catastrophe. A young maid, nervous under the weight of so much sudden consequence, entered with a tray of fresh glasses, her foot caught on the frayed edge of the rug. Verity had noted earlier. The tray tilted, glasses, water, and a decanter of sherry arced through the air. Time seemed to slow. Her mother shrieked. Clara jumped back with a cry. Her father froze. But Verity moved. She did not think, she acted, her body trained by 1,000 such small domestic emergencies. She was out of her chair in an instant, her body intercepting the trajectory of the falling decanter. It landed with a soft thud against her hip, the stopper flying out, drenching the side of her gray dress in dark, sticky sherry. She barely registered it. Her other hand shot out and steadied the maid, who was white-faced and trembling. It is quite all right," Verity said, her voice a low, calm anchor in the sea of chaos. "And no harm done. Just a bit of a spill, eh?" She took the tray from the girls, shaking hands. "Go and fetch a cloth and a basin of fresh water. And tell cook to hold dinner for 10 minutes. The maid, rescued from the brink of dismissal, nodded and fled. Verity set the tray down, righted the empty decanter, and began picking up the fallen glasses, her movements economical and precise. The room was utterly silent, save for the drip of sherry onto the floorboards. Lord Ashworth was staring, aghast at the mess. Her family was staring at her, embarrassed by the display of such unseemly competence. But the Marquess of Wycliffe was watching her with a different expression entirely. The blank, assessing look was gone. In its place was a flicker of something else, a sharp, focused attention. He was not looking at the mess, he was looking at the way she had managed it. He was looking at the quiet authority with which she had directed the terrified maid. He was looking at the dark stain spreading across her dress, a sacrifice she had made, without a momentous hesitation, to prevent a larger disaster. He had come seeking a solicitor, a man of law, but in that moment he saw something far more valuable. He saw a solution. He did not stay for dinner. He concluded his business with her father, something about a land title dispute on the edge of his vast property in the study. The transaction swift and decisive. Verity, having changed into an even older, more serviceable dress, oversaw the cleanup of the dining room and the resetting of the meal, her mother's pointed comments about making a senia washing over her. She thought that was the end of it. A strange, disruptive evening, a story to be told and retold in the county for weeks. The Marquis of Wycliffe, appearing like a thunderclap and vanishing just as quickly. 2 days later, a groom in the Wycliffe livery arrived with a letter, It was not for her father, it was for her. The paper was thick, creamy, and expensive, bearing the single, stark crest of a hawk in flight. The handwriting was as spare and controlled as the man himself. Miss Atherton, I require a private audience. I will call upon you tomorrow at 3. Ensure we are not disturbed. Wycliffe, it was not a request, it was a summons, a command. Verity read it 3 times, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. What could the most powerful man in the county possibly want with her? Her mother was convinced it was an offer of employment, perhaps as a companion for some elderly aunt. A fine opportunity for you, Verity, Shade said, already mentally spending the salary. A Harrowmere is a great house. You could learn a great deal. A Verity said nothing. She folded the letter and tucked it into the pocket of her apron. She had a feeling, a deep, unsettling certainty, that this was not about employment. Not in the way her mother imagined. He arrived precisely at 3, as promised. She met him in her father's study, the only room in the house that felt remotely serious enough for the occasion. She had forbidden her mother and Clara from entering. For once, they had obeyed, awed into submission by the sheer force of the Marquess's name. He stood by the window, staring out at the overgrown garden, his back to her. He did not turn when she entered, though she knew he had heard her. The silence stretched thick and heavy. He was making her wait. A test of her nerve, she would not fail it. She walked to the other side of her father's large, cluttered desk and stood there, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. She waited. Finally he spoke, his voice filling the small, dusty room. My estate, Harrowmere, is in a state of advanced decay. It was not the opening she expected. He turned then, and his gray eyes fixed on hers. Not the stone and mortar, that is sound, the life within it. The accounts are in chaos. The staff are demoralized and leaderless. The gardens are overgrown. The house is cold. It is a machine without an engineer, a kingdom without a queen. He took a step closer. I am a man of many duties, Miss Atherton. I sit on boards in London. I oversee mines in the north. I command a vast and complex enterprise. I have no time for drapery swatches or the price of beeswax. I have no talent for it. My late wife, she had the gift. Since her passing 5 years ago, the house has been slowly freezing to death. A Verity remained silent, her mind racing. This was a confession of a kind she had never heard. A man of his stature, admitting to failure, even a domestic one, was unheard of. I also have a ward, he continued, his voice dropping slightly. My late wife's niece, Elara. She is 13. She is defiant, clever, and unhappy. Her parents are gone. She is my responsibility. Her inheritance is significant, and there are vultures who would see it for themselves. She has driven off 3 governesses in as many years. She needs a mother, or something like it. Something strong and constant. He paused, his gaze unwavering. I have been observing you, Miss Atherton. Not just the other night, I made inquiries. You have run this household for 10 years. You manage the accounts. You oversee the staff. You do it all with no budget, no authority, and no thanks. You are, by all accounts, the most competent woman in the county. The blunt praise was more shocking than any insult. It was a truth she had known about herself her entire life, but had never heard spoken aloud. I am in need of a marchioness. He said the words landing like stones in the quiet room. Not for romance, not for society. I have no time for either. I need a partner, an administrator, a chatelaine, someone to command my household, to protect my ward, and to stand with me against those who would see my house fall. He stopped directly in front of her. Your father is about to sell you to Lord Ashworth for a pittance to secure your sister's dowry. You will be miserable, and your talents will be wasted. I offer you a different arrangement. Marry me, Miss Atherton. You need a home. I need a wife. It is a transaction that benefits us both. The sheer breathtaking audacity of it stole the air from her lungs. He was not proposing. He was presenting a business contract. He had assessed her value, calculated the benefits, and was now making an offer. There was no pretense of affection, no hint of courtship. It was cold, logical, and utterly terrifyingly sensible. Her first instinct was to say yes, to grab this lifeline, this unbelievable escape from her life of thankless servitude, to become the Marchioness of Wycliffe. The power, the safety, the sheer vindication of it was a heady wine. But a lifetime of being underestimated had forged a core of steel within her. She had been treated as a functionary for too long to simply accept a promotion. If she was to do this, it would be on her own terms. She lifted her chin, meeting his cool gaze with her own steady one. Before I answer, my lord," she said, her voice quiet but firm. You will answer me. I do not bargain with half a story. You said there are vultures. Who are they?" A flicker of surprise in his eyes. He had expected gratitude, or fear, or blushing confusion. He had not expected a cross-examination. He held her gaze for a long moment, then gave a short, sharp nod, as if she had passed another, more crucial test. Her uncle, a man named Finch. He portrays himself as her loving guardian, but I believe he wants control of her inheritance. And, he hesitated for the first time. Me own mother, the Dowager Marchioness. She believes I should marry for status, for bloodline. She believes Alara should be sent away to a school in Switzerland. She sees Haromir as her domain, and she will see any wife I choose, especially a wife from outside her circle, as an usurper. Verity processed this. The picture was becoming clearer. It was not just a cold house he was asking her to run. It was a battlefield. I see, she said slowly. Then she took a breath, marshalling her thoughts, naming her price, not in gold, but in power. If I agree to this transaction, there will be conditions. I expected nothing less, he said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips for the first time. First, Verity began, her voice gaining strength with each word. I will be your Marchioness, in fact, not just in name. I will not be a glorified housekeeper to be ignored. Until I am needed, I will have full and final authority over the household. That includes the budgets, the hiring and firing of all staff, and the complete restoration of the house and grounds as I see fit. Your word will be the only one above mine. He nodded. Agreed a second. Your ward, Alara. She will not be Amaya ward or a Yora ward. She will be our ward. I will be responsible for her education, her welfare, and her happiness. I will not have my decisions regarding her countermanded, not by governesses, not by tutors, and not by you, without a full discussion first, and she will not be sent away. A child does not heal from loss by being exiled. His expression softened, almost imperceptibly. Agreed. A third. Verity paused, choosing her next words carefully. This was the most important point of all. Your mother. The Dowager Marchioness. I will treat her with all the respect due to her station and to her as your mother. But I will not be bullied, I will not be undermined, and I will not permit her to treat me as hired help in my own home. You must make it clear to her and to the entire world that I am your wife, and an attack on my authority is an attack on yours. You must have my back, my lord, always. She finished, her heart pounding. She had laid her terms bare. She had demanded respect, authority, and loyalty from a man she had just met, a man who held all the power. She had given him every reason to walk away, to call her impertinent and find a more pliable candidate. Everett Carrington did not walk away. He stood there, looking at her not as a problem to be solved or a tool to be used, but as a person. He saw the intelligence, the strength, the unbending dignity she had kept hidden for so long. He had come looking for an engineer for his broken machine, and he had found, to his astonishment, a general. You will have it, he said, his voice quiet but resonant with the force of an oath. All of it. You have my word as a Carrington. He extended his hand, It was not a romantic gesture, but a sealing of a contract, a partnership. Verity looked at his strong, capable hand, then placed her own, smaller and marked with the faint stains of household work, into his. His grip was firm and warm. Then, my lord," she said, the words feeling strange and momentous on her tongue. My answer is yes. The wedding was a quiet affair, a swift legal proceeding that shocked the county and horrified both their families. Verity's mother wept, not from joy, but from the sheer confusion of it. Clara was openly jealous. The Dowager Marchioness sent a letter so cold it might have been written in ice, informing her son that he had made a catastrophic error and that she would not grant the a persona he had married the honor of her presence. Everett read the letter, his jaw tight, and threw it into the fire. "As she will come around," he said, though his tone suggested it was a battle he was not looking forward to. "Or she will not. It does not signify but Verity knew it did. Her arrival at Harrowmere was like stepping into a painting of a sleeping giant. The house was magnificent, a sprawling masterpiece of Elizabethan stone, but a deep, chilling silence hung over it. Dust motes danced in the thin shafts of winter light that penetrated the grimy windows. The vast fireplaces were cold and empty, the air damp and smelling of neglect and old sorrows. The servants moved like ghosts, their footfalls swallowed by the thick carpets, their faces blank and resigned. This was not a home. It was a museum to a life that had ended 5 years ago. Everett gave her a brief perfunctory tour, his voice echoing in the cavernous halls of the librea, the ballrooma, the late Marchioness's morning rooma. He pointed to a set of closed doors. "We have kept it as she left it." Verity stopped. "Open it," she said. He looked at her surprised. It has not been opened in years." Then it is time," she said gently. He hesitated, then unlocked the door and pushed it open. The room was perfectly preserved, a shrine of chintz and rosewood. A piece of embroidery still sat in a hoop by the chair, a book lay open on a table, but the air was stale, the flowers in a vase long turned to dust, and a fine layer of gray film covered everything. It was not a tribute, it was a tomb. "The dead should be honored, my lord," Verity said softly, stepping into the room. "Not embalmed. A memory needs air to breathe, not a vacuum to suffocate in." She walked to the heavy velvet curtains and with a great heave pulled them open. Sunlight, bright and uncompromising, flooded the room, illuminating the dust and the decay. Everett flinched as if the light were a physical blow. He had been living in the dark for so long. He had forgotten the warmth of the sun. Verity turned to him. Tomorrow," she said, "we will have this room cleaned. We will polish the furniture and wash the curtains and fill it with fresh flowers. It will be a beautiful room again, a place to be used and loved." He just stared at her, a complex emotion warring in his eyes. He had asked for an administrator. He was beginning to realize he had gotten something far more dangerous. He had gotten hope. The first week was a silent battle of wills. The staff watched her, their expressions shuddered, waiting to see if she was just another temporary fixture. The housekeeper, a grim-faced woman named Mrs. Gable, who had been fiercely loyal to the late Marchioness, treated Verity with a correctness that was more insulting than open hostility. Verity did not confront her. She did not issue grand proclamations. She rose before the sun and she was the last to go to bed. She started in the kitchens, the heart of any great house. She found the old cook, a woman named Mrs. Petty, weeping quietly over a ruined batch of bread. The ovens, she explained, were unpredictable. Verity did not scold. She rolled up her sleeves, examined the flue, and discovered a blockage of old soot. With the help of a garden boy and a long pole, she cleared it. That afternoon, the kitchens were filled with the scent of perfectly baked bread. For the first time in months, Mrs. Petty looked at her with a dawning respect. She moved through the house like a quiet, purposeful tide. She had the windows washed, the brass polished, the fires lit in every room. She discovered the linen closets were a hopeless tangle and spent 2 full days sorting, mending, and organizing. Her fingers, which her mother had so disdained, proving more adept than any two maids. She found the account books, a chaotic pile of receipts, and ledgers filled with her husband's impatient scrawl. She spent her evenings in the library, a single candle burning late into the night, untangling the mess, creating order from chaos. Everett would often find her there when he came in from his study. He would stand in the doorway and watch her, her head bent in concentration, the light catching the smooth curve of her hair. He never said a word, but his presence was a quiet acknowledgement. He was seeing her work. He was seeing her worth. The true fortress, however, was the one that resided in the East Wing, Elara. Her ward met her for the first time at dinner on the second night. The girl was a pale, sharp-boned creature, with her aunt's dark hair and a pair of startlingly intelligent, hostile eyes. She wore her grief-like armor. So you wore the new one," Elara said, her voice dripping with insolence. She deliberately knocked her fork to the floor. Verity did not rise to the bait. She simply signaled to a footman another fork. "For Lady Elara, please." She turned to the girl, her expression mild. "I am not a new one. I am Verity, your new aunt. And your guardian. My uncle is my guardian." Elara snapped. Your uncle lives in London," Verity replied calmly. "I live here. We will be seeing a great deal of each other. I hope we can be friends." "I don't need friends," the girl muttered, and spent the rest of the meal in sullen silence. Verity knew that a direct assault on Elara's fortress of grief would fail. She had to find a different way in. She observed. She learned that Elara spent most of her days locked in her rooms, reading, that she loved to draw, but her charcoals were worn down to stubs, and her paper was cheap and thin. That she sometimes hummed a particular melody, a sad, minor key tune. Verity did not force conversation or offer clumsy sympathy. One afternoon she left a new, leather-bound sketchbook, a box of fine French charcoals, and a book of sheet music on the table outside Elara's store. She attached a simple note. "I thought you might have a use for these." She did not knock. She just left them and walked away. For 2 days, the items remained untouched. Verity felt a pang of disappointment. Then, on the third evening, as she passed Elara's door, she heard it. The faint, hesitant notes of the melody from the sheet music, picked out on the out-of-tune pianoforte in Elara's sitting room. It was a start, a single stone removed from the wall. The thaw came, as thaws often do, during a crisis. A late autumn storm blew in from the coast, a raging beast of wind and rain. It howled around the stone walls of Harrowmere, rattling the windows and sending drafts snaking through the halls. In the middle of the night there was a crash from the west wing, the old, seldom-used nursery. Verity was awake in an instant, grabbing her dressing gown. She found Everett in the hall, a lamp in his hand, his face grim. "A window is gone," he said. The old oak must have lost a branch." They reached the nursery to find a scene of devastation. A huge, jagged branch lay on the floor amid a shower of glass and splintered wood. Rain and wind were pouring into the room, soaking the carpets and the old shrouded furniture. The staff are all in the other wing," Everett said, shouting to be heard over the gale. "Oh, it will take an hour to rouse them." We don't have an hour," Verity shouted back. The floorboards will be ruined." What followed was an hour of frantic, coordinated effort. They were not Marquess and Marchioness. They were two people fighting a common enemy. He used his strength to haul the heavy branch back toward the shattered window, while she dragged waterproof oilcloths from a nearby storage closet to cover the furniture. They worked together to board up the gaping hole with a loose tabletop from the hall, their hands brushing in the dark, their breath mingling in the cold air. They were soaked, cold, and exhausted, but they had saved the room. As the storm began to abate, they stood in the wreckage, a strange sense of victory hanging between them. "At this house," Everett said, his voice raw as he looked at the chaos they had contained. It has not felt this alive since, ever. Even when she was here, it was always quiet, ordered. This is life. He looked at Verity, her hair plastered to her head, a smudge of dirt on her cheek, and his expression was one of pure, unadulterated awe. It was in the quiet aftermath of the storm that Alara finally lowered her drawbridge. Verity found her the next morning, standing in the doorway of the ruined nursery, her face pale. This was my mother's nursery?" Alara said, her voice small. "And my aunt's? It is a beautiful room," Verity said, coming to stand beside her. Once we repair the damage, we should open it up again. Perhaps as a schoolroom for you." Alara turned on her, her eyes flashing with the old fire. "So you can fill it with your things and pretend she was never here?" "No," Verity said firmly. "So we can honor her by filling her room with life and learning instead of leaving it to rot in the dark." She looked at the girl. Your aunt was a great lover of books, was she not?" "I found her journals. She wrote beautifully." Alara's jaw dropped. You read her journals?" "I have not," Verity said. "They are hers. And so they are yours. I had them moved to your room. I thought you might like to know her better." The girl stared at her speechless. Every other adult had tried to protect her from her grief, to distract her, to pretend the past did not exist. Verity was inviting her to walk right into it, but with a guide. Later that week, Alara came to the library where Verity was working on the accounts. She did not say a word. She just sat in a chair opposite the desk and began to draw in her new sketchbook. The silence was not hostile. For the first time it was companionable. The house was breathing again. The fires were lit, the hall smelled of polish and baking, and the faint sound of a pianoforte could often be heard from the east wing. Everett started dining with them every night, instead of taking his meals alone in his study. He spoke to Verity about estate matters, asking her opinion on tenant disputes and crop rotations. He spoke to Alara about her reading. His conversations with his ward no longer stilted and awkward. They were becoming a family. A strange, cobbled-together family, bound by a contract, but a family nonetheless. And then the letter arrived. It lay on the silver salver in the entrance hall, a stark white rectangle on heavy cardstock. The Dowager Marchionessa's handwriting was an elegant, sharp-toothed scrawl. Verity's heart sank even before Everett broke the seal. He read it, his face becoming a granite mask. Without a word, he handed it to her. "My dearest son, it has been too long. I find I cannot bear the separation any longer. I feel it is my duty to come and see for myself how you are faring, and to offer what guidance I can to your new bride. And to my dear grandniece, Alara. Our good cousin, Mr. Finch, has expressed a similar concern for the dear girl's welfare, and has offered to escort me. We shall plan to arrive on Tuesday next, and will stay for the month. Your loving mother, the Dowager Marchioness of Wycliffe." The letter was a declaration of war, disguised as a loving note. Guidance. Our good cousin, Mr. Finch, for the month. Each phrase was a carefully sharpened barb. The warmth that Verity had so painstakingly kindled in Harrowmere seemed to recede, sucked out into the cold autumn air. The staff's faces grew tight with anxiety. Mrs. Brea. Gable began to look at Verity, with an expression that bordered on pity. Alara retreated into a watchful silence, the sketchbook lying closed on her table. "We can tell her no," Everett said, his voice tight with a fury Verity had never seen in him. "It can write and say the house is not prepared to receive guests." Her own voice calmer than she felt. "It would only prove her point, that I am incapable, that you are ashamed of me. No, she is coming. We will be ready for her, Verity. You do not understand," he said, his control finally cracking. My mother, she does not merely disapprove, she destroys. She will look for any weakness, any crack, and she will pry it open until the entire structure collapses. Then, we must ensure there are no cracks," Verity said, her chin set with a determination that surprised even herself. She looked him in the eye. You made me a promise, my lord, that you would have my back." He looked at her, at the quiet strength in her face, the unyielding steel in her spine. She was not afraid. Or, if she was not showing it. She was preparing for battle, and he had promised to be her shield. "I did," he said, his voice softening. "And I will." A strange, fierce loyalty surged through him. This woman, this stranger he had married for convenience, had brought his house back from the dead. She had reached his ward when he could not. She had stood up to him, and now she was preparing to stand up to his mother. The thought of his mother's icy disapproval arrayed against Veridia's quiet competence filled him with a cold dread, but also a sliver of something else: anticipation. For the first time, he felt he might not be fighting his battles alone. The Dowager Marchioness, Lady Beatrice Carrington, and her companion, Mr. Finch, arrived on a wave of frigid displeasure. The Dowager was a tall, imperious woman, her posture as unbending as her principles, her face a handsome, discontented mask. She was Everett, in miniature, but with all the warmth frozen out. Mr. Finch, by contrast, was all smiles and solicitous charm. He was a man of indeterminate age, with a soft body and hands that seemed to be perpetually rubbing together, as if washing themselves of some invisible stain. The Dowager's inspection of Harrowmere began the moment she stepped out of the carriage. Her eyes swept the freshly raked gravel, the polished front doors, the gleaming brass, and her lips thinned. She had expected to find chaos. The visible presence of order was an immediate affront. Her greeting to Verity was a masterpiece of condescension. She extended 2 fingers, her gaze sweeping over Verity's simple but well-made wool dress. "So," she said, her voice like the chipping of ice. "You are the persona. My son has married. We must have a long chat. I am certain there is much I can teach you about the running of a proper house." It was almost the exact line. Verity had predicted the echoed wound delivered in person. Beside her, she felt Everett tense. But Verity simply took the offered fingers in a firm, brief grip. "Welcome to Harrowmere, my lady," she said, her voice pleasant and utterly unruffled. "I am delighted to finally meet you. I am Verity, and this is my home. I am sure we will learn a great deal from each other." She had refused the role of student. She had asserted her ownership. The first shot had been fired, and it had been deflected. The Dowager's eyes narrowed slightly. This was not the frightened little mouse she had been expecting. Mr. Finch, meanwhile, was fawning over Alara, who stood stiff and silent beside Verity. My dearest girl," he cried, attempting to embrace her. How you have grown. I have been so worried about you. All alone up here." Alara sidestepped his embrace, her small face expressionless. Have not been alone," she said. My Aunt Verity has been with me." Finch's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he recovered. Of course. A new aunt, how wonderful." He directed a look of cloying sympathy at Verity. "It must be so challenging, stepping into such a role. But do not you worry, my dear lady. I am here to help in any way I can." The battle lines were drawn. The next weeks became a quiet, brutal siege. The Dowager conducted a relentless campaign of attrition, finding fault where there was none. The soup was too hot, the fires were too low. The new curtains Verity had chosen for the morning room were a trifle provincial. She would issue countermanding orders to the servants, only to have them politely inform her that the Marchioness had already given her instructions. Verity had briefed the staff thoroughly, securing their loyalty not with threats, but with fair wages and respect. Mrs. Gable, the grim housekeeper, had become Verity's staunchest defender, a silent, formidable shield. Mr. Finch's tactics were more insidious. He played the part of the concerned friend, the helpful family member. He would praise Verity to her face, then plant seeds of doubt with Everett or the Dowager. She is a marvel, of course," he would sigh. But one does worry. She seems to be spending a great deal. Is the estate truly able to bear such expense? Or to Alara, your new aunt is very practical, but does she understand the finer things? The needs of a young lady, of quality. He focused his efforts on Alara, trying to drive a wedge between her and Verity. He brought her expensive, inappropriate gifts from Lundo. Augury sweets. He whispered to her about the fun they would have when he was her guardian, the balls she would attend, the fortune she would command. Verity watched and waited, her mind a cold, clear instrument. She was not just fighting for her place, she was fighting for the soul of this house and the future of her ward. She continued her work, the quiet, steady rhythm of her days, a bulwark against the chaos her mother-in-law sought to create. The house ran more smoothly than ever, a testament to her competence that infuriated the dowager. The schemer made his first major move a week into the visit. He requested a private meeting with Everett, the dowager, and Verity, under the guise of discussing Alara's education. He arrived with a sheaf of papers. "Ah, my dear Everett," he began, his tone somber. I do this with the heaviest of hearts, but my concern for Alara compels me to speak. I have been doing some AH research into the background of our new Marchioness." He produced a letter. Verity recognized her own handwriting with a jolt of cold shock. It was a letter she had written 2 years ago, in a moment of desperation, to a placement agency in London, seeking a position as a governess. "Ah, I am a woman of good family, but no means," Finch read aloud, his voice dripping with false pity. "I am prepared to accept any reasonable position that will offer me board and a modest salary. I am skilled in household management and the instruction of young children. My situation is urgent." "Ah," the dowager gasped, a theatrical sound. "A destitute," she whispered. "A common adventuress." Finch pressed his advantage. "Ah, it is clear, is it not? She saw you, Everett, a wealthy, grieving marquess, and she saw her chance. She trapped you. This was never about love, it was about survival." A turned to Verity, his eyes gleaming. Can you deny you wrote this letter, my lady? Can you deny you were desperate?" The room was silent. Everett was staring at the letter, his face pale and unreadable. The dowager looked triumphant. Verity felt the trap close around her. It was the truth. She had been desperate. But it was not the whole truth. She looked not at her accuser, but at her husband. "I wrote that letter," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I do not deny it. My family was in financial distress. I sought to earn my own living, rather than be a burden. I do not see the shame in that." She paused, then added, "What I find curious, Mr. Finch, is how you came to possess a private letter from the files of a London agency." Finch blustered. "I have my sources, concerned friends, or you have a thief on your payroll," Verity finished quietly. She turned back to Everett, her heart aching. His face was a mask. Did he believe them? After everything? Later that night, she found him in his study, staring into the fire. The space between them felt like a chasm. "I can endure her," Verity said, her voice tight with unshed tears. "Ah, endure him. But I cannot endure you doubting me." He turned to her, and the raw agony in his face shocked her. "I doubt you," he said, his voice a low growl. Verity, I have spent the last 5 years of my life surrounded by liars and flatterers. My mother, who claims to love me, but seeks only to control me. Men like Finch, who smile while they sharpen their knives. The whole world pays me deference, and not a single person tells me the truth." He crossed the room in 2 strides and gripped her arms, his touch surprisingly gentle. You," he said, his eyes burning into hers. The only honest thing that has happened to me in a decade." "I don't doubt you," his voice broke. "I cannot afford to doubt you. You are all that stands between this house and the grave." It was not a declaration of love. It was something far more desperate, more raw. It was a confession of absolute need. In that moment, the transaction between them dissolved, and something real and terrifying and beautiful began to take its place. He needed her. Not her skills, not her title, her. The final assault came 2 weeks later. Mr. Finch, having failed to discredit Verity personally, moved to seize the ultimate prize. He announced that he had consulted with his solicitors, and with the full support of the Dowager Marchioness, was formally petitioning the Court of Chancery to have Alara's guardianship transferred to him. It is for the best, the Dowager announced at a grim dinner. A Harrowmere is no place for a young girl. And Verity with her Ray background is clearly not a suitable guardian. Finch will take her to London, present her to society. He has her best interests at heart, and, his interest is in her fortune, Everett stated, his voice dangerously low. A nonsense, a Finch said with a wave of his hand. I am merely protecting my niece from a life of provincial obscurity. The trustees agree with me. They are coming tomorrow. To hear my petition, it is, I am afraid, a formality. Hi, he smiled, a predator's smile. He believed he had already won the trustees. 3 stern-faced men who held Alara's future in their hands. They arrived the next morning and were shown into the library, which Verity had prepared for the confrontation. A fire blazed in the hearth. Coffee and biscuits were served. It was all very civilized, a civilized execution. Finch began, his voice smooth and reasonable. He spoke of his love for his late sister, his concern for his niece. He painted a picture of Harrowmere as a place of gloom and neglect, and of Verity as an unqualified, low-born usurper. He presented his plan for Alara, a fine school in Switzerland, followed by a debut in London, all managed by him. Then he played his trump card. And I am afraid, there is the matter of the estate's finances, he said, opening a large leather-bound ledger. I have had my own accountants examine the books. It seems that since the new Marchioness took control, expenditures have skyrocketed. The estate is bleeding money. It is on the verge of bankruptcy. He slid the ledger across the polished table. I cannot, in good conscience, allow my niece's inheritance to be tied to such a failing enterprise. The head trustee, a severe man named Mr. Blackwood, opened the ledger. He frowned, his brow furrowing as he scanned the columns of figures. The Dowager looked at her son with an expression of pained disappointment. Everett, you see, this is what comes of it. Ruin? I tried to warn you. Everett did not look at his mother. He was looking at his wife. Verity was standing by the fireplace, her face calm. She had not said a word now. She moved. She walked to the table and looked down at the ledger Finch had presented. She let the silence stretch for a beat. An interesting fiction, Mr. Finch, she said, her voice clear and carrying in the quiet room. A very creative piece of work. But you have made a rather elementary error. Tained, Finch paled. I. Donna, know what you mean. You have the wrong paper stock, Verity said simply. She ran a finger along the edge of the page. The Marquess's accounts use a heavy linen rag paper from the Whitley Mill, ordered quarterly. This is cheap cotton pulp, likely purchased from a stationer's in London. I know, because I placed the order for the real paper myself, 3 weeks ago. It arrived yesterday. She turned to a side table and picked up another ledger, identical in binding, but somehow more substantial. She placed it on the table next to Finch's forgery. The difference in the quality of the paper was subtle but undeniable. This, she said, tapping the new ledger. The truth. And as for my profligacy, you will find the actual household books for the last 3 months inside. Mr. Blackwood, if you would be so kind as to turn to the last page, you will see a summary. You will find that overall expenses are down by 20%. All supplier debts from the last 5 years have been cleared. And the staff, for the first time since the late Marchioness's passing, have received their back wages in full. Mr. Blackwood's eyes widened as he flipped to the back of the real ledger and read the neat columns of Veritia's handwriting. He looked up first at Finch, whose face had gone a pasty white, and then at Verity, with a newfound and profound respect. Furthermore, Verity, continued her voice, gaining a righteous fire, Mr. Finch's plan to send Alara to Switzerland is not to broaden her horizons, making it easier for him to gain control of her trust when she comes of age. He has been systematically attempting to bribe her with gifts and poison her mind against her own family. Slander, Finch sputtered, scrambling to his feet. Is it? A small, clear voice said from the doorway. All heads turned. Alara stood there, dressed not in a childish frock, but in a simple dark dress that made her look older than her 13 years. She walked into the room, her gaze fixed on the trustees. He is lying, she said, pointing a trembling finger at Finch. He told me, if I said I was unhappy here, he would take me away to live with him, and then I would be rich and free to do as I pleased. He said my Aunt Verity was nobody, just a servant who got lucky. G turned and looked at Verity, and her eyes were filled with a fierce, protective loyalty that broke Verity's heart. My Aunt Verity, Alara said, her voice ringing with conviction, taught me how to mend my own dress when I tore the lace. She gave me my mother's journals so I could know her. She found me books on architecture because I liked to draw buildings. She has never lied to me, not once. She took a deep breath and took Veritia's hand. And she is my family. I will not leave. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a battle won, of a truth spoken by a child that had obliterated a mountain of lies. The Dowager Marchioness stared at her son, at the woman beside him, and at the girl holding her hand. She saw not the ruin she had predicted, but a fortress, a family, forged in adversity, stronger than any bloodline. For the first time, her mask of iron certainty cracked, and a look of profound confusion took its place. Everett, who had remained still and silent throughout, finally moved. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He walked to stand beside his wife and his ward, placing a hand on Veritia's shoulder, the gesture both a comfort and a claim. He looked at his mother. A mother, he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of a final judgment. You once said, I could not marry beneath me. You were right. For the first time in my life, I have married my equal. Then he turned his cold, furious gaze on Mr. Finch. You will leave my house now. You will not speak to my ward again. You will find a letter from my solicitor regarding your fraudulent activities and your attempt to embezzle funds from a Minora's trust, waiting for you in London. I imagine the Crown will be very interested in your creative accounting. Finch, utterly defeated, seemed to shrink. He fled the room without a word, a man whose carefully constructed world had just been dismantled by a woman with a good head for figures and a girl who knew the truth. That night, the house was quiet. The enemies were gone. Verity stood in the library, looking into the flames of the fire, her body trembling with the aftermath of the battle. She had won. They had won. She heard him enter the room, felt his presence behind her. The crime, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Was not that I married you. The crime was that I did it for my own selfish reasons. That I used you and your competence to solve my problems. Verity turned from the fire to face him. Did you? She asked softly. He stepped closer, his face illuminated by the flickering light. The mask of the Marquess was gone. In its place was just Everett, a man stripped bare of all pretense. Told myself. I needed a housekeeper, an administrator, a partner, an ally. It was all true, he said, his voice low and raw. But it was also a lie I told myself to hide from a much simpler truth. I did not know what this house needed. I did not know what I needed until you walked into it and pulled open the curtains. He reached out and took her hand, his thumb stroking the back of her knuckles. "A Verity," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I love you, eh?" She held her breath, the words hanging in the air between them. "More precious than any fortune. Do not say it, if it is only gratitude." "Everett," she whispered back, her own heart's deepest fear. He shook his head, and a slow, genuine smile, the first she had ever truly seen, transformed his face, chasing away the last of the shadows. "A gratitude is for a job well done. My love for balanced books and a warm house. This is for the woman who did it. The woman who faced down my mother and saved my child and brought my heart back to life. The woman who stayed." He leaned in and kissed her. It was not a Victoria's kiss or a contractual one. It was clumsy and honest and full of a deep, desperate tenderness. It was the kiss of a man who had been lost in the cold and had finally, unbelievably, found his way home. 6 months later, Harrowmere was a different place. Laughter, a sound it had not heard in years, echoed in its halls. Alara, no longer a pale, grieving ghost, spent her afternoons in the gardens with Verity, her sketchbook filled with designs for a new folly. The great house was alive, its windows open to the sun, its rooms filled with flowers, and the scent of baking. The Dowager Marchioness came to visit. She was still stiff, her compliments still backhanded, but there was a grudging respect in her eyes as she watched Verity effortlessly manage a small crisis with a spilled pot of jam and a tearful kitchen maid. Before she left, she pressed a small, intricately carved ivory box into Verity's hand. "The Carrington family has a tradition," the Dowager said gruffly. The Marchioness must have a place for her keepsakes." It was an acceptance. An armistice. One warm evening, Verity and Everett walked along the terrace, the setting sun turning the old stone of the house to gold. Alara ran ahead chasing butterflies. You saved us, you know," Everett said, taking Verity's hand. This house, Alara." Mia, Verity, smiled her old dry wit, softened by love. "I simply balanced the books. My Lord Marquess." He stopped and pulled her to him, his arms wrapping around her waist. "Ah, and my heart," he whispered against her hair. "Ah, you balanced my heart." She had been the woman deemed beneath him, the quiet, overlooked daughter brought in to solve a problem, but she had become the foundation on which he had rebuilt his life, the partner he could not live without, the love he never knew he was searching for. She was the Marchioness of Wycliffe. She was home. She stayed.